Today you'll learn the Milanese stitch. It's a diagonal stitch created by making triangle or arrowhead shapes alternating from row to row. It's comprised of 4 diagonal stitches that widen 1 row each stitch. It's wonderful to use with different fibers to give the stitch even more texture, and you can alternate different threads with different rows to have a more interesting look. It's best used on a wider piece of your design, so something like the landscape or water, even the background or sky is going to be the best place to use it, since you want to get the full effect of the stitch in that design area. You'll begin with a single tent stitch, and then you'll drop down into the same row that your first stitch began to start your second stitch, this time skipping over 1 hole. So 1, 2. Your third stitch will begin in that same exact row, this time skipping over 3 stitches. 1, 2, 3, or 3 holes. And then your fourth stitch will begin in that same exact row, this time skipping over 4 holes. 1, 2, 3, 4. Now I'll come back down and I'm going to go directly in the center of my 4-hole stitch. So the second and third hole, and that's where I'll do my tent stitch. And then I'm going to come directly between that new tent stitch to continue my pattern. So skipping over 1, 2, same row to do my 1, 2, 3 stitch, and then I'll do same row to do my 4-hole stitch. 1, 2, 3, 4. Now I'll show you one more time. In this same direction, you're always going to start with your tent stitch, then do 2 holes, 3 holes, and then 4 holes. And you can see that my stitches are always starting in the same row and ending in the same row. Now I'm going to repeat the pattern just in reverse. So I'm going to work my way up instead of down, and where my 4-hole stitch was, I'm going to start with my tent stitch. And where my 3-hole stitch was, I'm going to do my 2-hole stitch. Where my 2-hole stitch was, I'm going to do my 3-hole stitch. And where my tent stitch was, I'm going to do my 4-hole stitch. Now I'm still staying in the same exact row to begin and same exact row to end. And I'll come back to do my tent stitch in the middle of my 4-hole stitch and then repeat the same pattern. So I'm just working the same exact stitch upwards now. And you can check yourself because you'll see that your 4-hole stitch from the previous row is always going to match your tent stitch. Your 3-hole stitch from the previous row will match your 2-hole, and then the 2-hole from your previous one will match your 3-hole, and the 4-hole from your, the first hole from your previous stitch will match your 4-hole from your new stitch. So you can see that we're just creating these little triangles or arrowheads as we're working our stitch, and you'll just continue this pattern alternating rows for the entirety of your design area.